The Volkov estate stood grand and imposing behind tall security walls, yet inside its elegant halls, an atmosphere of quiet frustration and simmering anger had settled over the household for nearly 8 months. Alexander Volkov, once one of the most powerful and physically imposing mafia bosses in the city, now sat confined to a wheelchair, the result of an assassination attempt that had left a bullet lodged dangerously close to his spine. The attack had come suddenly, ruthlessly, orchestrated by a rival organization hoping to eliminate him entirely. Though he survived, the damage to his spine left him partially paralyzed from the waist down, stripping away the physical dominance and control that had once defined his entire identity and reputation. Since the attack, Alexander had become increasingly bitter, his sharp mind and commanding presence now trapped within a body he felt betrayed him completely. He directed his frustration and anger at everyone around him, particularly the string of caregivers his family had hired to assist with his daily needs. "Get out!" Alexander snapped coldly at his latest caregiver, a nervous young man barely into the room before Alexander's harsh words drove him back out again. "I don't need someone hovering over me like a helpless invalid." His sister, Katerina, sighed heavily, standing in the doorway having witnessed yet another caregiver fleeing in frustration and fear. "Alexander, this is the 5th caregiver this month. You need help, whether you want to accept it or not." "I need to be left alone," Alexander replied bitterly, wheeling himself toward the window, staring out at the estate's grounds with visible frustration and barely restrained anger. "You can't keep living like this," Katerina insisted firmly, isolated, angry, refusing help. "It's not healthy, Alexander, physically or emotionally." Alexander remained silent, his jaw tight, with barely controlled bitterness, clearly unwilling to acknowledge the validity of his sister's concerns. Desperate to find someone capable of managing her brother's difficult, hostile behavior, Katerina reached out to a private agency known for placing caregivers with even the most challenging, resistant patients. The agency recommended one candidate specifically, someone known for her unconventional yet remarkably effective methods. "Her name is Rosie Alvarez," the agency director explained over the phone. "She's a bit chaotic, unconventional in her approach, but she has an impressive track record with difficult patients who've driven away every other caregiver." Katerina hesitated only briefly before agreeing, desperate enough to try anything at this point. Within days, Rosie arrived at the Volkov estate, her energetic, colorful personality immediately evident from the moment she stepped out of her car, wearing mismatched, brightly colored clothing and carrying an oversized bag stuffed haphazardly with various supplies. "Hi there." Rosie greeted Katerina cheerfully at the door, her warm smile immediate and genuine despite the estate's clearly tense atmosphere. "I'm Rosie, here to help your brother. I promise, I'm much tougher than I look." Katerina studied her curiously, uncertain what to make of Rosie's chaotic, energetic demeanor, yet sensing genuine warmth and confidence beneath her unconventional appearance. "I appreciate you coming, Miss Alvarez, but I have to warn you, my brother isn't exactly welcoming." "Don't worry," Rosie replied confidently, waving off Katerina's concern easily. "I've handled worse. Lead the way." Katerina guided her cautiously through the mansion's elegant hallways toward Alexander's private study, where he sat rigidly by the window, his expression cold and dismissive even before Rosie fully entered the room. "Another one?" Alexander said coldly, not even bothering to look up as Rosie entered enthusiastically. "I already told Katerina I don't need a babysitter." "Good thing I'm not a babysitter then," Rosie replied cheerfully, completely unfazed by his harsh, dismissive tone. "I'm your new caregiver, Rosie. Nice to meet you, Grumpy Pants." Alexander's head snapped up sharply, clear disbelief evident at her casual, disrespectful tone. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Rosie said, grinning playfully despite his obvious hostility. "Now let's get started. I hear you've been giving everyone a hard time." Alexander glared at her, clearly unaccustomed to anyone speaking to him so casually, so boldly, especially given his intimidating reputation. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." "Actually, I do," Rosie replied confidently, setting her bag down casually. "A grumpy man who's scared and frustrated because his body isn't cooperating the way he wants. But don't worry, We'll figure this out together. Alexander's expression darkened further, clearly irritated by her casual dismissal of his intimidating demeanor. I don't need your pity, or your ridiculous positivity. Good, Rosie replied cheerfully, unbothered by his hostility. Because I'm not offering pity. I'm offering help, whether you like it or not. Alexander stared at her incredulously, clearly unaccustomed to anyone standing so boldly against his usual intimidating authority. Despite his obvious frustration, something about Rosie's fearless, chaotic energy intrigued him slightly, a feeling he quickly suppressed beneath his usual bitter, controlled exterior. Fine, he said finally, though clear reluctance colored his tone. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. Rosie's grin widened confidently. Wouldn't dream of it, boss man. Let's get started. As Rosie began organizing her supplies enthusiastically, completely unfazed by Alexander's continued hostility, neither of them realized clearly that her chaotic, persistent energy was about to challenge not only his physical limitations, but also the deep, guarded walls he had built carefully around his wounded pride and vulnerable heart since the attack that had changed his life so dramatically. Rosie's first day at the Volkov estate set the tone for what would become an unusual, often chaotic routine. She arrived each morning with unpredictable energy, rearranging Alexander's carefully controlled schedule with her own unconventional methods, much to his obvious irritation. This isn't how physical therapy is supposed to work, Alexander protested one morning, as Rosie insisted on playing loud, upbeat music during his exercises instead of the quiet, clinical atmosphere he was accustomed to. Says who? Rosie replied cheerfully, adjusting his leg carefully while humming along to the music. Boring therapy makes for boring results. A little energy never hurt anyone. It's unprofessional, Alexander grumbled, though he found himself unable to entirely suppress the corner of his mouth twitching slightly at her ridiculous enthusiasm. Professional is boring, Rosie replied simply, continuing his exercises with practiced efficiency despite her seemingly chaotic approach. Now push against my hand. Come on, boss man. I know you've got more strength than that. Alexander pushed reluctantly, surprised by the genuine effort her playful challenge provoked from him. Despite his best efforts to remain distant and irritated, something about Rosie's persistent, chaotic energy slowly began chipping away at his carefully guarded resistance. Over the following days, Rosie continued her unconventional methods, refusing to be intimidated by Alexander's cold demeanor or sharp words. She rearranged his room with brighter colors, insisted on opening windows for fresh air despite his complaints, and brought unexpected, humorous energy into what had become a stagnant, bitter daily routine. You do realize, Alexander said one afternoon, clear exasperation evident despite the faint amusement flickering behind his controlled expression, that you're the most disorganized, chaotic person I've ever encountered. Thank you, Rosie replied brightly, taking his comment as a genuine compliment. I prefer to think of myself as delightfully unpredictable. Alexander shook his head, though something warmer than his usual bitter irritation flickered briefly in his tired eyes. You're impossible. Impossible people get impossible results, Rosie replied confidently, continuing his therapy exercises with practiced skill despite her playful, chaotic demeanor. Despite his continued resistance, Alexander found himself gradually, subtly improving under Rosie's unconventional care. His mobility slowly increased, his mood, though still guarded, showed small signs of genuine improvement, moments of reluctant engagement replacing his previous complete isolation and bitterness. One afternoon, while attempting a particularly challenging exercise, Alexander stumbled slightly, nearly falling from his wheelchair. Rosie caught him quickly, her chaotic energy momentarily replaced by genuine, focused concern. Easy there, boss man, she said softly, steadying him carefully. I've got you. Alexander remained silent for a moment, genuinely surprised by her sudden shift into calm, focused competence. You're stronger than you look, he admitted grudgingly. I get that a lot, Rosie replied, her playful grin returning quickly. People underestimate chaotic energy. Alexander studied her carefully, something shifting subtly in his usual guarded expression. Why do you do this, Rosie? Why choose such a difficult profession, dealing with impossible patients like myself? Rosie considered his question seriously for a moment, genuine warmth evident beneath her usual playful exterior. Because everyone deserves a chance to find joy again, even when life gets difficult. Especially then, actually. Alexander studied her thoughtfully, clearly moved by her genuine, heartfelt answer despite his usual guarded skepticism. "That's an admirable philosophy," he said quietly, "even if your methods remain thoroughly chaotic." "Chaotic and admirable aren't mutually exclusive," Rosie replied cheerfully, her infectious enthusiasm returning fully. Later that same afternoon, following a particularly exhausting round of exercises, Rosie accidentally knocked over an entire tray of medical supplies, sending items scattering chaotically across the floor. She burst into genuine, uncontrollable laughter at her own clumsiness, the sound infectious and warm, echoing pleasantly through the previously somber room. Alexander watched her, initially startled by her sudden burst of laughter, yet found himself unexpectedly smiling, genuine amusement bubbling up unexpectedly from somewhere deep within him, a place he had thought long buried beneath bitterness and anger. "You're absolutely ridiculous," he said, though his voice carried genuine warmth rather than his usual bitter frustration. "Ridiculous, yes, but you're smiling," Rosie pointed out triumphantly, still giggling as she gathered the scattered supplies. "First genuine smile I've seen from you since I arrived." Alexander realized suddenly, surprised by his own reaction, that she was entirely correct. He hadn't genuinely smiled, let alone laughed, since the assassination attempt that had left him paralyzed in bitter months earlier. "I suppose," he admitted slowly, genuine surprise evident in his tone, "your chaotic methods aren't entirely without merit." Rosie grinned triumphantly, genuine warmth reflected clearly in her playful eyes. "See, chaos isn't so bad after all, boss man." As Rosie finished gathering the scattered supplies, Alexander watched her quietly, something unfamiliar and warm settling gently within his chest, an emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Despite his initial hostility and continued skepticism about her unconventional methods, he found himself unexpectedly, genuinely grateful for her chaotic, persistent presence in his otherwise bitter, isolated life. Yet neither Alexander nor Rosie realized clearly that this small, genuine moment of connection and laughter was merely the beginning of a much deeper, more significant transformation, one that would soon be tested severely by dangerous forces circling quietly outside the estate's walls, forces eager to exploit any perceived weakness in Alexander's compromised, vulnerable position. As weeks passed, Rosie's chaotic yet effective care continued gradually transforming Alexander's daily life. His physical strength slowly improved, and though he remained guarded, small moments of genuine warmth and reluctant trust began appearing more frequently between them. One quiet evening, following an exhausting physical therapy session, Alexander sat unusually still, staring silently out the window, his expression distant and troubled. Rosie, sensing his shift in mood, approached carefully, setting aside her usual playful energy. "Penny for your thoughts, boss man?" she asked gently, settling into a chair nearby. Alexander remained silent for a long moment before finally responding, his voice quieter, more vulnerable than she had ever heard it. "Do you know what it feels like, Rosie, to go from being feared and respected by everyone around you, to being unable even to walk across a room without assistance?" Rosie studied him carefully, genuine empathy evident in her expression. "I can't fully understand exactly how that feels, no, but I imagine it's incredibly difficult, frustrating." "It's more than frustrating," Alexander admitted, bitterness creeping into his voice despite his obvious vulnerability. "It's humiliating. My entire identity, my authority, was built on strength, control, respect earned through fear. Now I sit here, helpless, dependent on others for even the simplest tasks." Rosie listened patiently, allowing him space to continue without judgment or interruption. "That fear of losing control, of appearing weak, that's understandable, Alexander. But needing help doesn't erase who you are. It doesn't make you less capable, less deserving of respect." Alexander glanced at her, surprised by the genuine sincerity in her words. "You truly believe that?" "I do," Rosie replied firmly. "Strength isn't only physical. It's mental, emotional too. And from what I've seen these past weeks, you have plenty of that kind of strength, even confined to this chair. Alexander studied her carefully, something shifting subtly behind his guarded eyes, genuine appreciation evident despite his lingering vulnerability. Thank you, Rosie. That means more than you probably realize. Their quiet, genuine moment was interrupted suddenly by Marco, Alexander's trusted second-in-command, entering urgently. Sir, we have a problem. Surveillance has picked up unusual activity near the estate's perimeter. It appears the Kovalenko family may be testing our defenses. Alexander's expression instantly hardened, old instincts sharpening despite his physical limitations. The Kovalenkos? They've been quiet since the attack. Exactly, Marco replied grimly. Their sudden interest now suggests they've learned about your compromised condition, possibly viewing your paralysis as an opportunity to strike again. Alexander's jaw tightened with frustration and barely controlled anger. Increase security immediately. I won't allow them another opportunity to finish what they started. Rosie watched this exchange carefully, genuine concern evident beneath her usual chaotic energy. Alexander, is this dangerous? Should I be worried? Alexander turned to her, his expression softening slightly despite the seriousness of the situation. It's a concern, yes, but Marco will ensure proper security measures are taken. You needn't worry excessively. Despite his reassurances, Rosie sensed clearly the genuine danger simmering beneath his controlled words. She remained quiet, processing this new, unsettling information carefully, aware suddenly of the deeper, more dangerous complexities surrounding Alexander's world beyond his physical limitations. That night, security around the estate intensified significantly, guards patrolling more frequently, tension evident throughout the household. Rosie, unable to sleep, wandered quietly through the halls, finding Alexander still awake, sitting tensely near his window, staring intently into the darkness outside. Can't sleep either? She asked softly, entering quietly. Alexander glanced up, clear exhaustion and worry evident in his tired eyes. Too much on my mind. Rosie sat down beside him, her usual playful energy replaced by quiet, genuine concern. Alexander, if there's real danger here, danger connected to your compromised position, maybe it's time to accept some level of vulnerability. Allow others to help you more fully. Alexander studied her carefully, clear conflict evident in his troubled expression. It's not that simple, Rosie. Admitting vulnerability in my world often invites greater danger, not less. But isolating yourself, refusing help entirely, hasn't exactly kept you safe either. Rosie pointed out gently. Perhaps genuine strength comes from acknowledging your limitations, working together with people you trust, rather than facing everything entirely alone. Alexander remained silent, clearly wrestling internally with the truth behind her gentle words. Before he could respond further, sudden shouts echoed from outside, followed immediately by the sound of gunfire breaking the tense silence of the night. Get down! Alexander shouted urgently, quickly pulling Rosie protectively behind him despite his own physical limitations, years of dangerous instinct overriding his compromised mobility. Marco rushed in moments later, breathless and alarmed. Sir, we've caught intruders attempting to breach the perimeter. It appears the Kovalenko family made their move sooner than anticipated. Alexander's expression hardened instantly, protective anger overriding his earlier vulnerability. Secure the estate immediately. I won't allow them to harm anyone here, especially not Rosie. As chaos and tension gripped the estate, Rosie remained close beside Alexander, her earlier playful energy replaced entirely by genuine fear and concern for both their safety. She realized clearly, in this tense, dangerous moment, that Alexander's vulnerable, paralyzed condition had inadvertently placed them both directly in the path of serious, escalating danger that would soon test decisively the genuine strength, courage, and connection they had unexpectedly built together over these past challenging weeks. By morning, the estate had been secured, 2 intruders captured, several others having fled into the night. Marco reported grimly to Alexander, who sat rigidly in his study, his expression a mixture of controlled fury and lingering unease. The captured men confirmed they're working for the Kovalenko family. Marco reported. They were testing our defenses, gathering intelligence on your condition and our security measures. This was reconnaissance, not a full assault. Which means the real attack is still coming, Alexander said grimly, his jaw tight with frustration. They're probing for weakness before committing fully. Sir, given your condition, Marco said carefully, perhaps it would be wise to relocate temporarily, somewhere more secure until we can properly address this threat. Alexander's expression darkened with wounded pride. You mean hide, like a helpless invalid? I mean survive, Marco replied firmly, though respectfully. There's no shame in strategic caution, sir. Alexander remained silent, clearly torn between his wounded pride and the practical necessity of protecting himself and everyone in his household, including Rosie, from escalating danger. After Marco left to continue security arrangements, Rosie entered quietly, having overheard fragments of their tense conversation. Alexander, she said carefully. Maybe Marco's right. Maybe it's time to accept some help, some protection, at least until this danger passes. Alexander turned to her, frustration and fear evident beneath his controlled exterior. Rosie, I can't protect anyone properly from this chair. I'm a liability now, not an asset. If the Kovalenkos attack directly, I won't be able to defend myself, let alone you or my household. That's not entirely true, Rosie argued firmly. You're still sharp, strategic, experienced. Your body might be limited, but your mind isn't. It's not enough, Alexander said bitterly, old fears resurfacing painfully. I should send you away, Rosie, somewhere safe, far from this danger I've inadvertently placed you in. Rosie's expression hardened with determination, refusing to accept his attempt at dismissal. I'm not leaving, Alexander. Not now. Not when things are genuinely dangerous. I didn't take this job to abandon you the moment things got difficult. This isn't about the job anymore, Alexander said, his voice softening slightly despite his obvious fear. This is about your safety, your life. I won't risk that. Then let me help you protect it, Rosie insisted firmly. Together, not by pushing me away out of fear. Alexander studied her carefully, genuine conflict evident in his troubled expression, torn between his protective instincts and his growing, undeniable feelings for her chaotic, courageous presence in his life. You're remarkably stubborn, he finally admitted, though warmth colored his tone despite the tension. I prefer determined, Rosie replied, offering a small, genuine smile despite the serious danger surrounding them. Over the following days, Alexander reluctantly began accepting greater collaboration, both from Marco's security team and from Rosie's unexpected strategic insights. Despite her chaotic energy, Rosie possessed a sharp, intuitive understanding of people and situations, often noticing subtle details others overlooked entirely. What if, Rosie suggested during a tense strategy meeting, instead of simply defending against their next move, we create the impression that you're more vulnerable than you actually are. Let them underestimate you, then use that against them? Alexander studied her thoughtfully, genuine interest evident despite his initial skepticism. Continue. If the Kovalenkos believe you're completely incapacitated, desperate, and unprepared, Rosie explained, they might grow overconfident, careless in their approach. That overconfidence could become their critical weakness. Marco nodded slowly, considering her unconventional suggestion seriously. It's risky, but it could work, especially combined with proper security precautions. Alexander studied Rosie carefully, genuine admiration evident beneath his usual controlled demeanor. Your chaotic thinking continues to surprise me, Rosie. This is actually quite brilliant. Rosie grinned triumphantly, clearly pleased by his genuine acknowledgement. Told you chaos has its uses, boss man. Over subsequent days, they carefully orchestrated the impression of vulnerability, subtly reducing visible security, while secretly reinforcing hidden defenses and strategic positioning throughout the estate. Alexander, despite his physical limitations, proved sharp and decisive in coordinating these careful preparations, his old strategic instincts remaining as sharp as ever despite his compromised mobility. Meanwhile, the Kovalenko family, receiving reports of Alexander's apparent vulnerability and reduced security, grew increasingly confident, believing their carefully planned attack would easily succeed against a supposedly incapacitated, desperate rival. One evening, as final preparations were completed, Alexander found himself alone briefly with Rosie, genuine gratitude evident in his tired but determined eyes. "Rosie, regardless of what happens next, I want you to know, your presence here has changed something fundamental within me. You've helped me find strength I thought I'd lost completely." Rosie's expression softened, genuine warmth evident despite the tension surrounding them. "You never lost that strength, Alexander. You just needed reminding it was still there." Alexander reached for her hand gently, an unusual display of vulnerability from someone typically so guarded and controlled. "Whatever happens tonight, please stay close to Marco's team. Stay safe." "I will," Rosie promised softly, though determination remained evident in her voice. "But Alexander, promise me you'll fight, truly fight, rather than assuming defeat simply because of your limitations." Alexander studied her carefully, genuine resolve hardening within his tired, determined gaze. "I promise, Rosie. Tonight, we prove decisively that being confined to this chair doesn't mean I'm without strength, strategy, or fight." As night fell over the estate, tension mounting steadily in anticipation of the Kovalenko family's expected attack, Alexander and Rosie prepared together, unaware exactly how intense and dangerous the coming confrontation would truly become, a confrontation that would soon test decisively everything they had both fought so hard to protect and build together. Night settled heavily over the Volkov estate, tension thick in the air as everyone waited anxiously for the anticipated attack. Marco's men were positioned carefully in hidden locations throughout the grounds, appearing from the outside to be minimal and relaxed, exactly as planned to lure the Kovalenko family into overconfidence. Alexander sat in his study, positioned strategically near the window where any observer might see him, appearing alone and vulnerable, his wheelchair angled deliberately to suggest helplessness. Rosie remained nearby, though hidden carefully from outside view, her sharp eyes watching the grounds through a small gap in the curtains. "Movement near the east wall," she whispered urgently, spotting shadows shifting cautiously beyond the estate's perimeter. Marco's voice crackled quietly through Alexander's earpiece. "Confirmed, sir. Multiple armed men approaching from the east and north sides. They believe they're catching us unprepared." "Let them believe that a little longer," Alexander replied calmly, years of strategic experience steadying his voice despite the tension. "Wait until they're fully committed before engaging." Rosie glanced at him, admiration evident despite her obvious nervousness. "You're remarkably calm for someone about to face an armed assault." "Panic solves nothing," Alexander replied simply, though genuine tension was evident beneath his controlled exterior. "Strategy and patience, that's what wins battles, even from a wheelchair." Minutes passed tensely as the Kovalenko family's men advanced carefully, clearly confident in their belief that Alexander's estate remained poorly defended. As they breached the perimeter, moving confidently toward the main house, Marco's hidden security team sprang into coordinated action, catching the attackers completely by surprise. Gunfire erupted suddenly, chaos breaking out as the well-prepared defenders overwhelmed the overconfident attackers rapidly. Rosie stayed low, following Alexander's earlier instructions carefully, though her sharp eyes remained alert, watching for any unexpected complications. Suddenly, 3 attackers broke through the initial defense, moving directly toward the study where Alexander sat, clearly believing him an easy, vulnerable target. Rosie's heart raced with sudden fear as she realized they were about to encounter Alexander directly. "Alexander," she whispered urgently, "they're coming this way." Alexander's expression sharpened instantly, old instincts overriding his physical limitations. "Get behind the desk now." Rosie moved quickly, ducking behind solid cover just as the door burst open, 3 armed men entering aggressively, clearly expecting no resistance from their supposedly helpless target. What they didn't anticipate was Alexander's carefully concealed weapon, hidden discreetly beneath a blanket draped across his lap, nor Marco's men positioned strategically just outside, ready to respond immediately to any sound of conflict within the study itself. Alexander moved decisively, drawing his weapon swiftly despite his limited mobility, catching the intruders off guard with unexpected, precise defensive fire. Two attackers fell instantly, injured but alive, while the third hesitated, clearly shocked by Alexander's unexpected resistance. "You underestimated me," Alexander said coldly, his weapon steady despite his physical limitations. A costly mistake. Before the remaining attacker could react, Marco's men rushed in, quickly subduing him completely. Rosie emerged cautiously from behind the desk, relief and awe evident in her expression as she witnessed Alexander's decisive, controlled response despite his paralysis. "You did it," she said softly, genuine admiration evident in her voice. "You proved them all wrong." Alexander lowered his weapon slowly, exhaustion evident despite his controlled composure. "We did it, Rosie. Your strategic insight made this possible." Outside, the confrontation continued swiftly as Marco's forces overwhelmed the remaining attackers, the Kovalenko family's poorly planned assault crumbling rapidly under the estate's well-prepared, coordinated defense. Within 20 minutes, the attack was completely repelled, several attackers captured for questioning, others fleeing in disorganized retreat. Marco entered the study shortly after, relief evident on his face. "Sir, the attack has been completely neutralized. We've captured several men for interrogation, including one of the Kovalenko family's senior lieutenants." Alexander nodded, satisfaction evident despite his obvious exhaustion. "Good. Let's find out exactly how deep this threat runs, and ensure the Kovalenko family understands clearly that my condition doesn't equal weakness." As the immediate danger passed, Alexander turned to Rosie, genuine gratitude and admiration evident in his tired eyes. "Rosie, your strategic thinking, your courage tonight, it made all the difference. I couldn't have handled this as effectively without you." Rosie smiled warmly, relief and happiness evident despite the intensity of the night's events. "We make a pretty good team, don't we, boss man?" Alexander studied her carefully, something deeper and more genuine than simple gratitude evident in his gaze. "We do, Rosie. More than I ever anticipated when you first walked through that door." Their tender moment was interrupted by Marco's return, his expression serious, once again. "Sir, our interrogation has revealed something important. It appears Viktor Kovalenko himself planned to personally oversee tonight's attack, confident in an easy victory. He's currently at a nearby safe house, awaiting reports of your assassination." Alexander's expression hardened with renewed determination. "Then it's time we pay Viktor Kovalenko a personal visit. Ensure he understands completely and permanently that my paralysis has never once equaled weakness." Rosie studied him carefully, recognizing clearly the fierce determination and renewed strength evident in his tired yet resolute expression. "Let's finish this, Alexander. Completely, permanently." As Alexander and Marco began organizing their final, decisive response against Viktor Kovalenko directly, Rosie remained close beside him, unaware exactly how intense and dangerous their final confrontation would soon become, a confrontation that would decisively prove, once and for all, that Alexander Volkov's strength, courage, and authority remained entirely intact, regardless of his physical limitations. Within the hour, Alexander organized a careful, decisive plan to confront Viktor Kovalenko directly at his nearby safe house. Despite Marco's concerns about the physical demands of the operation, Alexander insisted on being personally present for the confrontation. "Sir, given your condition, perhaps it's wiser to let the team handle this directly," Marco suggested carefully. "No," Alexander replied firmly. "Viktor needs to see me personally, needs to understand clearly that his assumption of my weakness was a fatal miscalculation. This confrontation requires my direct presence." Rosie, overhearing this exchange, stepped forward with quiet determination. "I'm coming too." "Rosie, this could be dangerous," Alexander said, concern evident despite his understanding of her determination. "I've already proven I can handle danger," Rosie replied firmly. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't overexert yourself, boss man." Alexander studied her carefully, genuine appreciation evident beneath his controlled exterior. "All right, but please, stay close to Marco's team." With careful planning complete, Alexander's forces moved swiftly to Viktor's safe house, catching his diminished security forces completely off guard, following the failed assault at the estate. The confrontation was swift and decisive, Alexander's men quickly overwhelming Victor's remaining guards. Cornered finally in his own safe house, Victor stared in disbelief as Alexander wheeled himself confidently into the room, flanked by Marco and several armed men, Rosie following closely behind. "This is impossible," Victor stammered, clear shock evident on his face. "You should have been eliminated tonight. You assumed my paralysis made me vulnerable, easy to defeat," Alexander said coldly, his voice carrying unmistakable authority despite his wheelchair. "That assumption cost you everything, Victor." Victor's expression shifted from shock to desperate anger. "This isn't over, Volkov. Even if you win tonight, others will come, sensing your weakness." "There's no weakness," Alexander replied firmly, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "My body may be limited, but my mind, my resolve, my authority remain entirely intact. Anyone who doubts that will meet the same fate as you tonight." With Victor's organization thoroughly dismantled and his own personal safety compromised completely, the confrontation ended decisively, Victor's remaining forces surrendering quickly, recognizing the hopelessness of continued resistance. As they returned to the estate later that night, exhausted but victorious, Alexander found himself reflecting deeply on the night's events, genuine relief and satisfaction evident despite his physical exhaustion. Rosie remained close beside him throughout the return journey, her earlier fear finally giving way to genuine happiness and relief. Once safely back within the estate's walls, Alexander turned to Rosie, his expression softening completely, revealing genuine warmth and vulnerability beneath his usual controlled exterior. "Rosie, tonight wouldn't have been possible without you. Your courage, your strategic mind, your refusal to see me as merely helpless, it changed everything." Rosie smiled warmly, genuine happiness evident despite the exhaustion of the day's events. "You did the hard part, Alexander. I just helped you remember your own strength." Alexander reached gently for her hand, his usual guarded composure completely dissolved. "Rosie, these past weeks with you, chaotic, unconventional, occasionally infuriating," he said, a genuine smile forming. "They've shown me exactly what I thought I'd lost forever after my injury. Genuine hope, happiness, and the possibility of finding real connection again." Rosie's breath caught softly at his heartfelt words, genuine emotion evident in her warm eyes. "Alexander, are you saying?" "I'm saying," Alexander continued, his voice steady despite his obvious vulnerability, "that somewhere during these chaotic, unpredictable weeks, I've fallen genuinely, deeply in love with you, Rosie. Not despite your chaos, but because of it." Tears of genuine happiness filled Rosie's eyes as she smiled warmly, her heart full of emotion. "I love you too, Alexander. I think I have for a while now, despite your grumpiness." Alexander chuckled warmly, genuine happiness evident for the first time since his injury. "I suppose I can live with being loved despite my grumpiness." Gently, Rosie leaned down, pressing a soft, genuine kiss against his lips, sealing their heartfelt declaration with warmth and genuine affection. In the months that followed, life at the Volkov estate transformed completely. With the Kovalenko threat fully eliminated and Alexander's authority firmly reestablished, tension gradually gave way to genuine peace and happiness. Alexander continued his physical therapy diligently, his relationship with Rosie growing steadily stronger, built entirely upon genuine respect, laughter, and unwavering support. Though his paralysis remained permanent, Alexander discovered gradually that his life, his happiness, and his authority no longer depended entirely on physical strength alone. With Rosie's chaotic, unwavering support beside him, he found genuine contentment and purpose once again. One quiet evening, sitting together on the estate's peaceful terrace, watching the sunset paint the sky in warm, gentle colors, Rosie rested her head gently against Alexander's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how different things might have turned out?" she asked softly. "If I hadn't walked through your door that first chaotic day?" Alexander smiled warmly, pulling her closer despite his limited mobility. "Every day. Your chaos, your courage, and your unwavering belief in my strength changed everything, Rosie. I'm forever grateful you walked through that door." Rosie smiled contentedly, genuine happiness and security settling comfortably around her heart. I'm grateful too, Alexander. Grateful I found someone who needed exactly the kind of chaos I bring into the world. Alexander gently kissed the top of her head, holding her closely as peaceful contentment settled comfortably around them both. And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving exactly how deeply grateful I am for your chaos, Rosie, every single day, seated or standing. From that day forward, Alexander Volkov was no longer known simply as the paralyzed mafia boss struggling desperately with bitterness and isolation, but privately, quietly, as a man who had finally found genuine happiness, strength, and love, all because a chaotic, caring, and utterly unstoppable caregiver had refused to give up on him.